The helicopter's rotors chopped through the thin mountain air as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos checked her medical supplies for the third time. Each piece of equipment had its place, organized with the precision that had kept dozens of soldiers alive over the past 8 months. Morphine syringes lined up like tiny soldiers, compression bandages rolled tight as drums, and hemostatic agents that could stop bleeding faster than any prayer. The other members of SEAL Team 6 barely acknowledged her presence. She had grown used to the treatment, the way conversations stopped when she approached, how they discussed mission details in hushed tones until she was out of earshot. To them, she was necessary but not essential, useful but not trusted, capable but not combat-ready. Commander Jake Mitchell sat across from her in the helicopter, his weathered face studying aerial photographs of their target. At 34, he had survived more firefights than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. His team called him Reaper, not because he brought death to enemies, but because he had a supernatural ability to cheat death when it came calling. Mitchell's reputation was built on impossible shots, split-second decisions, and an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements before they happened. He glanced up at Maria, his gray eyes revealing nothing. She had served under his command for 6 months, and he had never once questioned her medical decisions or criticized her performance. But he had also never included her in tactical discussions or asked for her input on mission planning. She was medical support, nothing more, nothing less. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, was meeting with local tribal leaders in a remote village. The SEALs would insert at dawn, establish overwatch positions, and wait for the target to show himself. Clean, simple, textbook. But Maria had learned that nothing in Afghanistan was ever clean or simple. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Maria grabbed her medical pack and followed the team out, keeping low as they moved toward the designated rally point. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, brown hills dotted with sparse vegetation and ancient stone walls that had witnessed countless battles. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez jogged up beside her as they moved toward their objective. Rodriguez was the team's communications specialist, a wiry kid from Texas who treated everyone with equal amounts of respect and good-natured ribbing. He was also one of the few team members who talked to Maria like she was actually part of the unit. "You nervous, Doc?" Rodriguez asked, adjusting the radio on his back. Maria shook her head. "Same as always." "Good," Rodriguez grinned. "Because I plan on staying in one piece today, and you're my insurance policy." The comment was meant to be reassuring, but it highlighted exactly what bothered Maria about her role. She was insurance, backup, a safety net. Important, yes, but always reactive, never proactive. She had joined the army to serve her country, earned her Ranger tab to prove she could handle anything the military threw at her, and completed every advanced medical training course available. Yet here she was, following behind while others led the way. The team reached their overwatch position just as the sun painted the eastern mountains pink and gold. Mitchell spread his men across a ridgeline that offered excellent visibility of the target village while providing multiple escape routes. Maria found herself positioned behind a cluster of rocks, her medical supplies arranged for quick access, with a clear view of the team's positions. She pulled out her binoculars and studied the village below. Mud brick houses clustered around a central courtyard where a few early risers tended to livestock. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children's laughter carried on the morning breeze. It looked peaceful, ordinary, completely unremarkable. But Maria had learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished normal villages from dangerous ones. No women moved freely in the open spaces. The men who appeared kept their heads down and moved with purpose rather than casual morning routines. Most telling, there were no dogs barking. In Afghan villages, dogs barked at everything. Their silence usually meant strangers had arrived recently. Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. Overwatch 1 in position. Overwatch 2 set. Came the response from Petty Officer First Class Marcus Tank Johnson, the team's heavy weapons specialist. Overwatch 3 ready, reported Chief Petty Officer David Park, their demolitions expert. Medical standing by, Maria responded, using the call sign she had been assigned. For the next 2 hours, they waited. Waiting was the hardest part of any mission, the time when minds wandered and focus could slip. Maria used the time to study each team member's position, mentally calculating how long it would take her to reach each one if they were wounded. She traced potential casualty evacuation routes and identified the best landing zones for medical helicopters. At 0847 local time, Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning quiet. Movement in the village. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. Maria swung her binoculars toward the dust cloud rising from the dirt road. 3 pickup trucks, the kind favored by Taliban fighters, wound their way toward the village. Even at this distance, she could see armed men in the truck beds. Positive identification on the target, Mitchell reported 30 minutes later. Main building, eastern window, 2nd floor. Through her binoculars, Maria could just make out figures moving inside the building Mitchell had identified. The waiting was about to end. All stations, this is Reaper. Mitchell's voice carried the calm authority that had kept his team alive through dozens of missions. Target is in position. We wait for him to exit the building for positive identification and clean shot. But the Taliban commander seemed content to remain inside. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2 hours. The sun climbed higher, turning their rocky overwatch position into an oven. Maria sipped water sparingly, knowing that staying hydrated was crucial, but that bathroom breaks were not an option. At 11:34, everything changed. Rodriguez's voice exploded through their earpieces. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south and west. Looks like a full convoy. We've got company. Maria shifted her binoculars and felt her stomach drop. At least 8 vehicles were converging on the village from 2 different directions. This wasn't a simple meeting anymore. Either their intelligence was wrong, or they had walked into something much bigger than anticipated. Overwatch positions report, Mitchell ordered. Overwatch 1 has eyes on 12 fighters dismounting from southern vehicles, Park reported. Overwatch 2 counting 15 fighters from the western approach, Johnson added. Maria did the math quickly. Their 6-person team was now potentially facing a force of at least 30 Taliban fighters, with more arriving every minute. The careful Overwatch mission had just become a survival situation. Reaper, this is Overwatch 3. Rodriguez's voice carried a new tension. I'm seeing movement in the hills behind our position. They're trying to flank us. The trap was closing. Somehow, their presence had been detected, and the enemy was moving to surround them. Maria felt the familiar pre-combat rush of adrenaline. But this time it was different. This wasn't just about keeping wounded soldiers alive anymore. This was about all of them staying alive. All stations, prepare for immediate extraction, Mitchell ordered. We're leaving. Now. But, as the team began their tactical withdrawal, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her binoculars, she could see Taliban fighters setting up what looked like heavy machine gun positions at both ends of the ridge they would need to cross to reach their extraction point. They weren't just surrounded. They were trapped. Reaper, this is medical. Maria's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Enemy has established blocking positions at grid references 41-23-7854 and 41-23-7901. Our extraction route is compromised. There was a moment of silence before Mitchell responded. Confirm those positions, medical. Maria double-checked her observations. Confirmed. They've got us boxed in. The situation had just gone from bad to impossible. 6 American Special Operations soldiers were trapped on a mountaintop in Afghanistan, surrounded by an enemy force that outnumbered them 5-1, with no clear escape route and no immediate backup available. For the first time since joining the team, Maria Santos was about to discover what it really meant to fight alongside the most elite warriors in the American military. And they were about to discover that the woman they called just a medic was capable of far more than they ever imagined. The real battle was about to begin. The first shots cracked across the mountainside like thunder, sending chips of rock flying from the position where Chief Petty Officer Park had been lying seconds earlier. The Taliban fighters had decided to end the standoff with overwhelming firepower, and the Americans found themselves in the middle of a killing zone with nowhere to run. Contact left. Contact left. Johnson's voice boomed through the radio as he opened fire with his M249 squad automatic weapon. The heavy machine gun chattered in short, controlled bursts, each muzzle flash revealing his position to dozens of enemy fighters who immediately began concentrating their fire on his location. Maria pressed herself against the rocky outcropping that had become her makeshift fortress, her medical training warring with every instinct that told her to grab a weapon and start shooting back. She watched through gaps in the rocks as muzzle flashes erupted from positions all around their perimeter. The SEALs were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in terrain that offered limited cover and no escape routes. Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos with supernatural calm. All stations, establish defensive perimeter. Conserve ammunition and watch for coordinated assault. Rodriguez, get me air support immediately. Working on it, Reaper, Rodriguez responded between bursts from his M4 carbine. Fast movers are 30 minutes out. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. Maria could already see Taliban fighters moving through the rocks below their position, using the natural terrain to advance closer to the Americans. These weren't undisciplined insurgents firing wildly from a distance. These were experienced fighters who understood tactics and terrain, and they were systematically closing the noose around the trapped SEALs. A bullet whined off the rock inches from Maria's head, followed immediately by the distant crack of the rifle that fired it. Someone was targeting her specifically, probably recognizing that eliminating the medic would demoralize the Americans and reduce their chances of surviving long enough for rescue to arrive. Medical, stay down. Mitchell's voice carried both concern and command authority. Let us handle this. But, as Maria watched the tactical situation develop, she realized that letting them handle it might not be enough. Park was pinned down behind inadequate cover, taking fire from at least 3 different positions. Johnson was doing his best to suppress the enemy advance, but his ammunition wouldn't last forever against this many targets. Rodriguez was splitting his attention between calling for air support and returning fire, making him less effective at both tasks. They needed something to change the dynamic of the fight, and they needed it quickly. Maria studied the enemy positions through her binoculars, her medical training providing an unexpected advantage. Years of triaging casualties had taught her to assess situations rapidly and identify the most critical problems first. As she analyzed the Taliban positions, she began to see patterns that her teammates might miss in the heat of combat. The enemy fighters were concentrating their heaviest fire on Johnson's position because his machine gun posed the greatest immediate threat. But they were advancing most aggressively up the eastern slope, where Park was struggling to hold his position alone. If that position fell, the Taliban would gain high ground that would allow them to fire down on the rest of the team. More importantly, Maria noticed something that chilled her blood. The enemy advance wasn't random or opportunistic. It was coordinated and disciplined, with covering fire and tactical bounds that suggested professional military training. These weren't local fighters who had picked up weapons to defend their village. These were experienced soldiers, possibly foreign fighters or Taliban special forces. A scream cut through the gunfire, and Maria's head snapped toward Park's position. Through her binoculars, she could see the demolitions expert clutching his left shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He was still firing with his right hand, but his rate of fire had decreased significantly. Park's hit, Rodriguez reported unnecessarily. Everyone had heard the scream. How bad? Mitchell demanded while putting precise shots downrange toward a Taliban position. Still in the fight, Park replied through gritted teeth. But I could use some company over here. That was Park's way of saying he was about to be overrun. Maria could see Taliban fighters working their way up the slope toward his position, using cover and concealment like professionals. In maybe 5 minutes, they would be close enough to throw grenades or assault his position directly. Tank, can you shift fire to support Park? Mitchell ordered. Negative, Johnson replied between bursts. I've got my own problems down here. Maria looked at Johnson's position and saw what he meant. At least a dozen Taliban fighters were advancing directly toward his location, firing and moving in textbook infantry tactics. If Johnson shifted his fire to help Park, his own position would be overrun within minutes. The mathematics of the situation were becoming clear, and they didn't favor the Americans. Too many enemies, too little ammunition, and no way to reposition without exposing themselves to concentrated fire from multiple directions. Unless something changed dramatically, the team would be overwhelmed within the next 10 to 15 minutes. Maria made a decision that would have surprised everyone who knew her, including herself. She pulled her M4 carbine from where it had been secured across her medical pack and began stripping away the equipment that would slow her down. Her decision wasn't based on bravado or adrenaline. It was based on cold medical logic. If Park's position fell, the entire team would likely be killed or captured. If she could reach him and provide supporting fire, they might hold long enough for air support to arrive. Medical moving to reinforce Overwatch 3, she announced calmly, as if she were reporting on a patient's vital signs. Negative, Mitchell's voice was sharp with command authority. Medical, maintain your position. But Maria was already moving, using the natural terrain to mask her movement from enemy observers. She had studied the ground during their long wait that morning, identifying potential routes and dead spaces that could provide concealment. Now that knowledge served her well as she bounded from rock to rock, always staying low, always moving when enemy attention was focused elsewhere. The 100 yards to Park's position felt like a mile. Bullets cracked overhead and sparked off rocks around her, but Maria focused on her breathing and movement, treating it like an advanced medical simulation where everything had to be done perfectly under pressure. She reached Park's position just as he was reloading his rifle with his one good arm. Up close, his wound looked worse than she had hoped. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, but it had also damaged muscles and tendons that would make precise shooting difficult. "Doc, what the hell are you doing here?" Park gasped, wincing as he tried to work the bolt on his rifle. "My job," Maria replied simply. She quickly assessed his wound, applied a pressure bandage, and injected him with morphine for pain management. But even as she worked, her eyes were tracking the enemy fighters who continued advancing up the slope toward them. "They're getting close," Park warned unnecessarily. Maria could see muzzle flashes from positions less than 50 yards away. She picked up her rifle and moved to a firing position beside Park, her medical bag positioned where she could reach it quickly if needed. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving between the rocks, their faces determined and professional. These weren't desperate insurgents making a last stand. These were confident soldiers who believed they were about to win a significant victory. Maria centered her crosshairs on the leading fighter, a bearded man in desert camouflage carrying what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Her finger found the trigger, and for a moment she hesitated. She had trained for this moment countless times, but training was different from reality. Training targets didn't have families waiting for them at home. Then, the man raised his RPG launcher toward Johnson's position, and Maria's hesitation evaporated. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, and the man dropped like a marionette with cut strings. The RPG round exploded harmlessly against a rock face 50 yards behind their position. "Nice shot, Doc," Park said with genuine admiration. But there was no time to celebrate. Maria was already acquiring her next target, a fighter with an automatic rifle who was advancing rapidly toward their position. This time she didn't hesitate. The man spun and fell, and the fighters behind him suddenly seemed less eager to continue their advance. For the first time since the firefight began, the momentum started to shift. The Taliban fighters who had been moving aggressively up the eastern slope began seeking better cover, their advance slowing as they realized the American position was more strongly defended than they had anticipated. "Reaper, this is Overwatch 3, Park reported with something approaching amazement in his voice. "Medical has joined my position and is engaging targets effectively. We're holding." There was a moment of silence from Mitchell, probably as he processed the fact that his medic had just disobeyed direct orders to reinforce a critical position and was now actively engaging enemy fighters. "Roger that, Overwatch 3, Mitchell replied finally. "Continue mission." Maria settled into her firing position beside Park, her medical training helping her maintain steady breathing and heart rate despite the intensity of the situation. She had found her place in the fight, and it wasn't in the rear providing backup support. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the shooting started, the Americans had a fighting chance. And Maria Santos was no longer just a medic. She was a warrior. The firefight had been raging for 45 minutes when Maria noticed something that changed everything. She was in the middle of reloading her rifle, her fourth magazine since joining Park's position, when movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Far down the valley, almost at the extreme range of her binoculars, she spotted what looked like a vehicle convoy moving along a distant ridgeline. At first, she assumed it was more Taliban reinforcements, which would have been catastrophic for the pinned-down Americans. But something about the movement pattern seemed wrong. The vehicles were maintaining too much distance from each other, and they were approaching from the wrong direction to be enemy forces. "Park, give me your scope," Maria said urgently, referring to the high-powered telescopic sight mounted on his sniper rifle. "What do you see?" Park asked, handing over the weapon despite his wounded shoulder. Maria steadied the rifle against a rock and peered through the advanced optics. What she saw made her heart race, but not with fear. 3 vehicles were moving in tactical formation along the ridgeline, but their silhouettes were wrong for Taliban vehicles. These were American Humvees, probably a patrol that had heard the gunfire and was moving to investigate. But as Maria studied their position and route, she realized they were walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves along the route the American vehicles would have to take, creating a kill zone that would trap the patrol in the same devastating crossfire that had pinned down the SEAL team. "Reaper, this is medical." Maria's voice cut through the combat chatter with urgent intensity. American patrol approaching from the southwest. Grid reference 41-23-70-423. They're heading directly into an ambush. Mitchell's response was immediate. "Say again, medical." "Confirm American forces. 3 vehicles, tactical spacing, definitely American." Maria confirmed while continuing to track the approaching patrol through Park's scope. "Enemy has prepared positions along their route. They'll be in the kill zone in approximately 8 minutes." The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The SEAL team was barely holding their own position against overwhelming odds, and now a patrol of American soldiers was about to drive into a trap that would likely kill or wound most of them. "Rodriguez, can you raise them on radio?" Mitchell ordered. "Negative contact," Rodriguez replied after several attempts. "Different frequencies, and they're not monitoring our tactical net." Maria watched through the scope as the American vehicles continued their approach, completely unaware of the danger waiting for them. She could see individual soldiers in the vehicles, probably young infantrymen responding to what they thought was an opportunity to help fellow Americans in trouble. Instead, they were about to become casualties themselves. "I can see the whole ambush setup from this position," Maria reported, forcing her voice to remain calm and professional. "Enemy has at least 2 RPG teams and multiple machine gun positions overlooking the road they'll take. The patrol won't have a chance unless someone warns them." "Options?" Mitchell asked curtly. He was asking his team for solutions, treating Maria's tactical assessment as seriously as he would input from any of his veteran operators. "Air support could break up the ambush," Johnson suggested between bursts from his machine gun. "Still 20 minutes out," Rodriguez replied. "Patrol will be in the kill zone in 6 minutes. What about signal mirrors or flares?" Park suggested. Maria shook her head, still tracking the approaching vehicles. "They're moving too fast and focused on the terrain ahead. They won't see visual signals until it's too late." The mathematics were brutal. An American patrol was about to be destroyed, and there seemed to be no way to prevent it without compromising the SEAL team's already precarious position. Moving to intercept or warn the patrol would mean abandoning defensive positions and exposing themselves to concentrated enemy fire. But as Maria continued to study the enemy ambush positions through Park's scope, she began to see possibilities that her teammates might miss. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves to attack the road, not to defend against threats from the ridgeline where the SEALs were located. Most importantly, the enemy's attention was now divided between maintaining pressure on the Americans and preparing their ambush for the approaching patrol. "Reaper, I have an idea," Maria said quietly. "But you're not going to like it." "Let's hear it." Maria took a deep breath. "The enemy sniper who's been targeting our positions all morning is in that cluster of rocks about 600 yards southeast. He's been taking shots at all of us, but he's positioned to have clear shots at the patrol when it enters the kill zone. If we take him out, it disrupts their ambush and gives the patrol a chance to escape." "Agreed," Mitchell replied. "But 600 yards is a challenging shot under these conditions. Park's wounded, and I can't get a clear angle from my position." Maria's hands were already moving to adjust the scope settings on Park's rifle. "I can make the shot." The silence that followed her statement was filled with the ongoing crack and whine of bullets, but Maria could feel the weight of her teammates' surprise even through the radio static. She was proposing to take a precision sniper shot at extreme range, under combat conditions, to save soldiers she had never met. "Medical, what's your experience with long-range precision fire?" Mitchell asked carefully. Qualified expert marksman on the M24 sniper system during Ranger School, Maria replied while making final adjustments to the rifle. "Consistent hits at 800 yards on the range." What she didn't mention was that range shooting was completely different from combat shooting. On the range, there were no enemy bullets flying overhead, no adrenaline making her hands shake, no lives hanging in the balance if she missed. But she also didn't mention that she had spent countless hours practicing precision shooting because she had always known that combat medics sometimes needed to make impossible shots to save lives. "The range is longer than what you trained for," Park pointed out. "And the wind conditions are tricky." Maria was already studying the wind indicators, watching grass movement and dust patterns to judge the crosswind that would affect her bullet's flight path. "I can compensate." She settled into a stable shooting position, using the natural rock formation to support the rifle's weight. Through the scope, she could see the enemy sniper's position clearly. He was well concealed, with only occasional glimpses of his rifle barrel and part of his head visible when he shifted to acquire targets. "The patrol is 4 minutes out," Rodriguez reported grimly. Maria began controlling her breathing, slowing her heart rate, and focusing entirely on the shot. At this distance, everything had to be perfect. Wind compensation, elevation adjustment, trigger control, follow-through. She had one chance to save the lives of soldiers she would probably never meet. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper as he prepared for his own shots at the approaching patrol. She could see him making adjustments to his scope, settling into his firing position, preparing to kill Americans who had no idea death was waiting for them. Maria centered her crosshairs on the target, made final adjustments for wind and distance, and began applying pressure to the trigger. 600 yards was at the extreme range of her abilities, but she had never needed to make a shot more than she needed to make this one. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round while tracking through the scope to observe her shot's impact. For what seemed like an eternity, but was actually less than 2 seconds, she waited to see if her bullet would find its mark. The enemy sniper's head snapped back, and his rifle toppled forward off the rock where it had been positioned. The man himself disappeared from view, and his position remained silent. "Target eliminated," Maria reported with professional calm that belied the relief flooding through her system. "Outstanding shot," Park said with genuine admiration. "But now they know exactly where we are." He was right. The muzzle flash from her rifle would have pinpointed their position for every Taliban fighter in the area. Within seconds, concentrated fire began impacting their position, forcing both Americans to press themselves deeper into whatever cover they could find. But Maria's shot had accomplished more than eliminating a single enemy sniper. The ambush that had been carefully prepared for the American patrol was now disrupted, with Taliban fighters shifting their attention and fire toward the ridgeline instead of the road below. "American patrol is approaching the former kill zone," Rodriguez reported. "They're taking some fire, but they're fighting through it instead of being slaughtered." Through gaps in the incoming fire, Maria could see the patrol vehicles accelerating through the area where they should have been destroyed. They were taking hits and returning fire, but they were moving and fighting instead of dying in a carefully prepared trap. "Fast movers inbound." 2 minutes out, Rodriguez announced with the first genuine enthusiasm in his voice since the firefight began. Air support was finally arriving, which meant the tide of the battle was about to change dramatically. But Maria realized that her single precision shot had probably saved more American lives than all the air support that was about to arrive. The patrol that should have been destroyed was now fighting its way to safety, and the Taliban ambush had been turned into a confused melee instead of a coordinated execution. "Medical, that was exceptional shooting." Mitchell's voice carried a new tone of respect that Maria had never heard before. "You may have just saved a dozen American lives." But even as Maria absorbed the praise, she was already shifting her attention back to the immediate tactical situation. The Taliban fighters were regrouping, air support was inbound, and the trapped SEALs still needed to fight their way off this mountain. The battle was far from over, but Maria Santos had just proven something to her teammates and to herself. When American lives were on the line, she wasn't just a medic who could shoot. She was a warrior who could save lives in ways that went far beyond bandages and morphine. The F-18 Super Hornets screamed overhead like mechanized angels, their jet engines drowning out the rifle fire that had dominated the mountainside for over an hour. Maria watched through Park's scope as the Taliban fighters scrambled for deeper cover, their coordinated assault suddenly disrupted by the arrival of American air power. "Danger, close air support inbound," Rodriguez announced with barely contained excitement. "Hornets are carrying a full load of ordnance and looking for targets." But as the first bombs began falling on Taliban positions, Maria noticed something that made her stomach clench with new worry. The airstrikes were devastating enemy concentrations in the valley below, but they weren't addressing the most immediate threat to the SEAL team's survival. While everyone's attention had been focused on the main Taliban force, a smaller group of enemy fighters had been working their way around the northern face of the mountain. They were now positioned less than 200 yards from the team's location, well inside the minimum safe distance for air support. These fighters would have to be dealt with using direct fire, and they were close enough to assault the American position with grenades and automatic weapons. Reaper, we've got movement on the northern approach, Maria reported, tracking the advancing fighters through her scope. Approximately 8 to 10 fighters, 200 yards, and closing. Mitchell's response was immediate. All stations, prepare for close assault. They're going to try to overrun us while the airstrikes are keeping everyone's heads down. Maria could see the tactical logic behind the enemy's final gamble. The airstrikes had trapped them in their positions, making escape impossible. Their only chance of survival was to kill or capture the Americans who were calling in the devastating fire support. It was a desperate move, but it might be their only option. The Taliban fighters moved with the skill and coordination that had characterized their entire assault. They used the rocky terrain for concealment, advanced in tactical bounds with covering fire, and maintained noise discipline that made them almost invisible until they were dangerously close. I count 9 fighters, Park reported, steadying his rifle despite his wounded shoulder. They've got at least 2 RPGs and what looks like a belt-fed machine gun. Maria studied the advancing enemy through her scope, her medical training once again providing unexpected tactical insights. The fighters were tired after hours of combat, their movements slightly less crisp than they had been earlier in the day. More importantly, they were focused entirely on the known American positions, apparently unaware that Maria had moved from her original location to reinforce Park. That gave her a tactical advantage she hadn't expected. Reaper, I have a flanking shot on the advancing element, Maria reported. They're focused on your positions and haven't adjusted for my current location. Roger. How many can you engage before they react to your fire? Maria studied the enemy formation carefully. The Taliban fighters were moving in a tactical column, with the lead elements focused on Mitchell's position while the supporting elements followed in their footsteps. If she timed her shots correctly, she could eliminate several fighters before the rest could identify her position and return fire. I can take at least 3 before they react, Maria estimated. Maybe 4 if they're really focused on your position. Do it, Mitchell ordered. We'll provide supporting fire as soon as you engage. Maria selected her first target, a fighter carrying what appeared to be an RPG-7 rocket launcher. Eliminating the RPG would prevent the Taliban from using explosive weapons against the American positions. She centered her crosshairs on the man's chest, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger smoothly. The fighter dropped immediately, the RPG launcher clattering against the rocks as it fell from his lifeless hands. Maria worked the bolt quickly and acquired her second target, a man with an AK-47 who was scanning the American positions through binoculars. He fell before he could warn his companions about the sniper fire coming from their flank. Her third shot took down the Taliban fighter carrying the machine gun, a weapon that could have suppressed the entire American team if it had been properly employed. By the time the remaining enemy fighters realized they were taking precision fire from an unexpected direction, Maria had eliminated half their assault force. The surviving Taliban fighters scattered for cover, their coordinated advance dissolving into desperate individual survival as they found themselves caught between Maria's precision fire and the defensive positions of the other SEALs. Within minutes, the immediate threat to the team's survival had been eliminated. Outstanding work, Medical. Mitchell's voice carried both relief and genuine admiration. You just broke up their final assault. But even as the immediate danger passed, Maria was already thinking about the next challenge they would face. The airstrikes had destroyed most of the Taliban forces in the valley, but they had also announced to every hostile force within 50 miles that there was a significant American presence in the area. Soon, enemy reinforcements would begin arriving, and the SEAL team would need to extract before they found themselves facing an even larger force. Reaper, this is Falcon 1-6, a new voice cut through the radio traffic. It was the pilot of one of the F-18s that had been providing air support. We've eliminated all visible targets in the valley, but we're detecting additional vehicle movement approximately 15 miles north of your position. Looks like reinforcements heading your way. How long until they reach our position? Mitchell asked. Based on current speed and terrain, approximately 45 minutes, the pilot replied. Rodriguez was already working his radio, coordinating with higher headquarters for immediate extraction. Dustoff is inbound, Reaper. Should have birds on station in 20 minutes for personnel recovery. 20 minutes until extraction, 45 minutes until enemy reinforcements arrived. Under normal circumstances, the timeline would have provided adequate safety margin. But nothing about this mission had been normal, and Maria suspected their troubles weren't over yet. As if to confirm her suspicions, Rodriguez's voice cut through the temporary quiet with news that made everyone's heart sink. Reaper, Dustoff is reporting mechanical problems with the primary extraction bird. They're working on a backup, but it's going to be at least 40 minutes before they can reach us. The mathematics had just turned against them again. Enemy reinforcements would arrive before American helicopters could extract the team. They were going to have to hold their position against fresh Taliban fighters who would be prepared for a prolonged battle. All stations, prepare for extended defense, Mitchell ordered with the calm professionalism that had kept his team alive through impossible situations. We're going to have company before our ride arrives. Maria checked her ammunition count and medical supplies, her mind already shifting into the planning mode that had served her well throughout her military career. They had enough ammunition for another firefight if they conserved their shots, and made every bullet count. Her medical supplies were sufficient to handle several more casualties if the wounds weren't too severe. But if the enemy reinforcements were as numerous and well-trained as the force they had just defeated, the team might need more than ammunition and bandages to survive. Medical, what's our casualty status? Mitchell asked. Park has a through shoulder wound, stable, and still combat effective, Maria reported. Everyone else has minor cuts and scrapes, but no significant injuries. We're in good shape medically. What she didn't report was her growing concern about their tactical situation. They had been in combat for over an hour, burning through ammunition and adrenaline at an unsustainable rate. The enemy reinforcements would be fresh, rested, and determined to avenge their comrades who had been killed by American airstrikes. But, as Maria looked around at her teammates, she saw something that gave her confidence despite the challenging situation ahead. These weren't just elite soldiers anymore. They were a team that had been tested under the most extreme conditions possible and had proven they could depend on each other completely. Park was still in his firing position despite his wound, ready to continue fighting with his one good arm. Johnson was redistributing ammunition among the team members, ensuring everyone had enough bullets for the next firefight. Rodriguez was working his radio with determined efficiency, calling in every available asset to support their defense. And Mitchell was moving between positions, checking on his people, and planning their final stand with the tactical genius that had made him a legend among Special Operations Forces. For the first time since joining the team, Maria felt like she truly belonged. She wasn't just the medic anymore, the person who stayed in the rear and patched up the wounded. She was a full member of one of the most elite fighting units in the world, and her teammates were treating her exactly like they treated each other, as a warrior they could trust with their lives. The enemy reinforcements were coming, and the next 40 minutes would determine whether any of them made it home alive. But Maria Santos was no longer worried about proving herself to her teammates. She was ready to fight beside them, and, if necessary, die beside them. The final battle was about to begin, and she was exactly where she needed to be. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon exactly 42 minutes after the airstrikes ended, rising like a brown storm against the crystalline Afghan sky. Through Park's scope, Maria could count at least 12 vehicles approaching their position, far more than the original Taliban force that had trapped them on the mountain. Reaper, this is medical, she reported with professional calm that masked her racing heart. Enemy reinforcements consist of multiple vehicle types, including what appears to be at least 2 technical vehicles with mounted heavy machine guns. The technical vehicles were the most serious threat. Toyota pickup trucks mounting Soviet-era 12.7mm machine guns could provide devastating fire support that would make their defensive position untenable. The Americans would need to eliminate those weapons quickly or risk being overwhelmed by superior firepower. Commander Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio with the same unflappable authority that had carried them through the past 2 hours of combat. All stations, focus fire on technical vehicles when they enter effective range. Medical, I need you to take the Barrett. Maria's breath caught in her throat. Mitchell was offering her his prized Barrett M82.50 caliber sniper rifle, a weapon capable of disabling vehicles and eliminating targets at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. It was the most powerful precision weapon in their arsenal, and Mitchell was entrusting it to the woman his team had once dismissed as just a medic. Roger that, Reaper, Maria replied, setting aside Park's rifle and moving toward Mitchell's position where the massive Barrett waited. The Barrett M82 was unlike any weapon Maria had ever fired. It weighed over 30 pounds, fired ammunition that could penetrate light armor, and generated recoil that could knock an inexperienced shooter off target for several seconds. But, as Maria settled into position behind the enormous rifle, her medical training once again provided unexpected advantages. Years of performing delicate surgical procedures had taught her to control her breathing, maintain steady hands under pressure, and remain focused despite external distractions. The same skills that allowed her to perform battlefield surgery while under fire now served her as she prepared to engage enemy vehicles at extreme range. Medical, your primary targets are the technical vehicles, Mitchell instructed. The .50 cal can punch through their engine blocks and disable their mobility. Secondary targets are any enemy leaders or heavy weapons teams you can identify. Through the Barrett's powerful scope, Maria studied the approaching convoy as it wound its way up the mountain road toward their position. The Taliban reinforcements were making no attempt at stealth or tactical dispersion. They appeared confident that their superior numbers would be sufficient to overwhelm the trapped Americans. That confidence was about to cost them dearly. Maria selected her first target, the lead technical vehicle that mounted a heavy machine gun in its cargo bed. The truck was approximately 800 meters away, well within the Barrett's effective range, but far enough that precision would be crucial. She adjusted the scope for distance and wind, controlled her breathing, and prepared to fire. The Barrett's thunderous report echoed across the mountainside like the voice of an angry god. The massive .50 caliber bullet struck the technical vehicle's engine block with devastating effect, sending steam and smoke erupting from the destroyed engine. The truck rolled to a stop, blocking the narrow mountain road and forcing the convoy to halt. Target 1 eliminated, Maria reported, already working the Barrett's bolt to chamber another round. But the Taliban reinforcements adapted quickly to the new threat. Instead of continuing their approach along the predictable road, they began dismounting from their vehicles and moving on foot using the rocky terrain for cover. These weren't local fighters responding to a call for help. These were professional soldiers who understood that their vehicles had become liabilities rather than assets. They're dismounting and advancing on foot, Rodriguez reported. Looks like at least 40 fighters, well-armed and disciplined. Maria shifted her attention to the second technical vehicle, which had stopped approximately 50 meters behind the first and was attempting to maneuver around the disabled truck. Through her scope, she could see the crew frantically trying to bring their heavy machine gun to bear on the American position. The Barrett's second shot punched through the truck's radiator and continued into the engine block, sending the vehicle's crew scrambling for cover as their transportation died around them. But even as Maria celebrated another successful shot, she realized that eliminating the vehicles had only forced the enemy to adopt more dangerous tactics. Without transportation, the Taliban fighters were now spreading out across the mountainside, using the natural terrain to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. They couldn't bring their heavy weapons to bear as effectively, but they were also much harder to track and engage with precision fire. Multiple groups advancing from the north and west, Johnson reported from his position. They're trying to get close enough for grenades and automatic weapons. Rodriguez, where's our extraction? Mitchell demanded. Dust-off is inbound, 5 minutes out, Rodriguez replied. But they're going to need the landing zone clear of enemy contact for safe extraction. 5 minutes might as well have been 5 hours. The Taliban reinforcements were advancing steadily toward the American position, and they would be within grenade range long before the helicopters arrived. The team needed to break up the enemy advance or risk being overrun in the final minutes before rescue arrived. Maria studied the tactical situation through the Barrett scope, her medical training helping her identify the most critical threats that needed immediate attention. The enemy advance was being led by what appeared to be experienced non-commissioned officers who were directing the movements of less experienced fighters. Eliminating the leaders might disrupt the coordinated assault. Reaper, I can see what appear to be enemy squad leaders directing the advance, Maria reported. Permission to engage leadership targets? Granted, Mitchell replied immediately. Anything that disrupts their coordination helps us. Through the powerful scope, Maria could see Taliban fighters receiving hand signals and verbal instructions from more experienced leaders. These men carried themselves differently, moved with greater confidence, and positioned themselves where they could observe and direct the overall assault. Maria centered her crosshairs on a bearded fighter who was obviously giving instructions to a group of younger men. At this range, the shot required perfect technique, but the Barrett's massive bullet would ensure that any hit would be immediately effective. The rifle's thunderous report was followed by immediate confusion in the enemy formation. The leader Maria had targeted simply disappeared, and the fighters he had been directing suddenly seemed uncertain about their next move. Without leadership, their coordinated advance began to falter. Leadership target eliminated, Maria reported, already seeking her next target. But even as she worked to disrupt the enemy advance, Maria could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. Their extraction was finally arriving, but the landing zone was still contested by enemy forces who were now less than 300 meters from the American position. "Dust-off is on final approach," Rodriguez announced. "We need to move to the landing zone immediately." The extraction point was a small clearing approximately 200 meters from their current defensive position. Under normal circumstances, it would be a simple tactical movement. But with enemy fighters advancing from multiple directions, the movement to the landing zone would expose the team to concentrated fire from determined opponents who knew this was their last chance to kill or capture American Special Operations Forces. "All stations, prepare for tactical movement to extraction point," Mitchell ordered. "Medical, continue providing precision fire support until we reach the landing zone." Maria realized she was being asked to perform an almost impossible task. She needed to provide accurate long-range fire to suppress enemy advances while simultaneously moving across broken terrain with a 30-pound rifle. It would require every skill she had developed as both a medic and a marksman. But as she slung the massive Barrett across her back and prepared to move, Maria felt a calm confidence that surprised her. 6 months ago, she had been just a medic, following behind while others led the way. Now she was an integral part of one of the most elite fighting units in the American military, trusted with their most powerful weapons and relied upon to make the shots that would keep them all alive. The helicopter was touching down in the landing zone, its crew chief already laying down suppressive fire to keep enemy heads down during the extraction. Maria and her teammates began their movement towards salvation, but they still had 200 meters of hostile terrain to cross before they would be safe. As bullets cracked overhead and ricocheted off rocks around them, Maria Santos realized that she had found her place in the war. She wasn't just a medic who could shoot, or a shooter who happened to have medical training. She was exactly what the situation required, a warrior who could save lives in whatever way the mission demanded. The extraction was going to be the most dangerous 2 minutes of her life, but Maria was ready. She had proven herself to her teammates and to herself. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would face it as a member of SEAL Team 6, not as an outsider trying to prove she belonged. The war had shown her who she really was, and she was ready to finish the fight.